Joining me today is the wonderful and amazing Hayley of The Gentle Mama. If you don't know her, you have to check her out. She is on Facebook, on Instagram, on I don't know what else. You've got your webpage. You'll tell us everything where you are. She is originally from the UK. She's been working with families for quite a while now, but currently resides in Dubai. So welcome, Hayley. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Tracy.
And I want to hear the story because you originally UK, you're now in Dubai. Yeah. What brought you there and what brought you to working with families there? Like, what a unique kind of path to have taken.
Yeah. I mean, I used to work in media planning and strategy, which was such a different path. And we were living in central London and we were, getting public transport everywhere and shopping at Selfridges during the lunch break. And it was busy and high flying and private members club and all this lifestyle. Slightly different now. My husband got offered a job. He works in finance and he got offered a job in Dubai. So we packed up and headed off. We said we'd go for 1 to 2 years to save some money because it's tax-free. And we got started over here and bought a house pretty much as soon as we got here. And I think we were just naive because we thought, hey, we'll buy a house and we'll have a baby. And then in a year or two, we'll come home. But it was a year or two before we finished decorating the house. So we were definitely not going to sell it straight away. That wasn't happening. We basically spent 9 months cooking a baby, decorating the house. And then my baby was born. And she is, I think, an orchid baby. And she's pretty high needs and sleep was a challenge. My expectations were really wrong. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was following the books and social expectations and social pressures. And I thought, I'm doing it all wrong. And I don't know why I'm ruining my baby, but she's not sleeping and all these other things. So then I got to that stage at around 8 months when they wake up in the middle of the night ready to party. And I remember sitting on the floor. We were in the UK visiting my parents, and I was sitting on the floor at 1 o'clock in the morning, crying whilst playing with my baby who's wide awake. And I thought, that's it. I can't do this. I have to get a sleep trainer. So I hired a gentle sleep trainer who told me that it was going to be entirely gentle. All crying was perfectly supported and it's normal and natural and all these things that you want to hear. And we got started and she didn't hand us the information all at once. The plan came day by day, which should have rang alarm bells straight away. And then once we got into it, we got into, I think, day 2 or day 3. And I was like, hang on a minute. This is gradual withdrawal. That's not what I wanted to do here. I kind of cottoned on to what was happening. And I thought, there is no gentle sleep support. There's nothing there. So I pulled out of that pretty sharpish and started doing my own research and learning for myself and digging into it. And that's how I started The Gentle Mama, because I became really passionate about it when I realized I'm not the only one out there who feels like this, and that it is really frustrating to be in this situation and not know where to turn or who to speak to. And especially out here, not to have anyone that I could hire either who would help me with anything. So yeah, that's kind of how I got here.
It's interesting. The fact you mentioned that whole gentle guise, and it's something that drives me nuts. And when I wrote the introduction to Sarah Ackles Smith's Gentle Sleep book, I used the phrase, beware the wolf in sheep's clothing. And I feel like it just speaks to so much of what is out there now, that I keep hearing, all these promises made to people. And I get people that work with me who have worked with others before, and they're like, well, they keep saying it's gentle. And I had one call once where they started up, they're like, all right, so at what point do you tell me to leave my baby to cry? And I'm like, I don't. It's kind of not part of this at all. So, but they were like, really? not sure I trust you, because like you're like the fourth person we've gone to now, and everyone ends up telling us that we need to leave our baby to cry. And I'm just like, oh my God, that's it. And they're all say they're gentle, but they're not, you know. No. It is really, so I mean, I know we didn't talk about it, but how did you use that as a guide as to what to tell people? Like, this is what to avoid when you're looking for help. How do you navigate out that gentle moniker before getting too deeply into it?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about it a lot in my writing. The wolf in sheep's clothing. You know, it is a huge thing, and there are over here, especially, there are a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon and using the term gentle in their marketing, using it in their names, in their branding, and it is in no way correlating to gentle parenting at all. And when you try and speak, you know, I did, before I certified as an infant sleep educator, I tried speaking with people about this and saying, look, this is not gentle what you're doing. How can you actually justify yourself in using that term? And they're like, oh, but it's more gentle than cry it out, so it is gentle. No, it's not gentle by absolute terms. It is not gentle. It is just slightly further down the scale on non-gentle.
Right? It is amazing to me, and yet it seems to be proliferating. I mean, even more. And I mean, I think we're lucky that there's a lot of places now coming out that really are certifying people as gentle, which I think is lovely. Like, I think we need that kind of push. And that's been, I think, probably over the last few years, one of the most beneficial things to come out of this. But it's now getting so hard to disentangle, because it's like everyone's learned that's that keyword. You just say gentle and people will buy into it, and they will come in. And then, you know, then you start to convince people like, oh, no, that little bit of crying, that's just protest crying. They're not really needing you. That's not. So therefore, those cries you get to ignore. But these other ones are what we're really concerned about.
Oh, and that drives me absolutely mad. I had somebody I went to a gentle sleep workshop. And in the workshop, they said, you know, you can ignore the protest cries. And as the mum, you know when it's a protest cry. And I was like, wait a minute, this isn't okay. You can't say that. They're still communicating with you. And it's just ludicrous. But I find if somebody is using the term sleep training in what they're doing, then that's when alarm bells ring, because you cannot train a baby to sleep. So anyone who is promising sleep training is pulling the wool over your eyes. They are making false promises. They are claiming things that they're not actually going to do. You can't trust it. So wherever there is the term sleep training, alarm bells. For me, you know, whenever it's mentioned on my site or in anything that I'm writing, it is saying, I don't do this. And of course, yes, for some people, that is their choice. Every family is different. They make their own choices, but I will never do that. And for me, the alarm bells come when you see the term sleep training, because that's when you're trying to change a baby's behavior generally to fit in with an adult's needs, rather than managing or meeting them where they are.
Yeah. And that's, you know, that discussion about meeting an adult's needs. We'll get to that, because I think that's such a interesting topic that I know we have lined up to kind of talk about with these individual babies' needs. But I want to kind of go back to this whole Dubai melting pot. Like, you live in a place with so many different cultures. And I mean, I think like I work with families around the world, but by and large, most of them, not all, but most come from similar cultural ideologies, similar cultural practices. I know what I'm up against. You know what I mean? Right off the bat, we know exactly that. You know, for example, if I have a client in the UK, I know how prominent cry it out is, and that separate sleep space and everything like that. So I know what I'm facing. Dubai seems like, I mean, you can talk about it, but it feels like there is just, how do you know what you're up against as you get into working with someone?
You know, it's so interesting. You don't know what culture somebody is coming from until you start a consultation with them, until you meet them. Even through their form, you know, I don't write on the form what is your heritage? Where did you live before Dubai? It is something, it's only when you start talking, you get to know them, that you get to know the culture that they're coming from. And it is a melting pot. You know, in Dubai, I think it's something in the 80%-ish is expats. Everyone else is local, but it's like 80-odd%, which is huge. And coming from all over the world, it's not just, you know, European expats, there's American, Canadian, there's Indian, there's from the Philippines, it's from everywhere. So yeah, my clients are from all over the world. So I often don't even know where they're coming from until they tell me what currency they want to pay in. But it's, yeah, the cultures are such a huge part of it. You know, if you're coming from India, for example, or coming from the Middle East as well, sleep is often seen as something that should be later in the night. Often they'll have a nap during the day, kind of like Spain, a bit of a siesta in the day, and then the kids are expected to stay up later, and the babies as well. So I will have clients who are telling me their babies are going to bed at 10 p.m. At, you know, 1 year old, and they're going to bed at 10 and then waking up at 9 in the morning, for example. And then I have other clients from the UK, and their babies are going to bed at 6:30, 7 p.m. and then they're waking up at 6:30 in the morning. But then you'll find the babies that are going to bed at 10 and then waking up at 6 in the morning. That would be mine.
Funny, I have that baby. Both my kids are late to bed and later to rise, and always have been. And it was always fascinating. When I lived in Vancouver, we did a homeschool group, and there was a couple from, where were they? Was it Hong Kong or China? I can't remember which. I apologize. But they would say, they're like, "Oh, you've got the Asian baby schedule." That's when you look at the research too. The average bedtime amongst most Asian nations is also quite late. The average bedtime can be upwards of 10 p.m. with some going to bed even later. And it's, you know, it is so interesting because I feel like these cultural differences, and when you end up, so does Dubai have kind of like, do the doctors there, do everything have that set of expectations around sleep that they're kind of pushed to people, or does it not really come up in conversations there?
It does. Sleep training is really prevalent here.
Okay.
There are a growing number of attachment parents and gentle parents and people who are just listening to their intuition and their baby. They don't have any labels. They don't know anything about attachment or gentle parenting, but they know that they don't feel comfortable with the sleep training route. That is growing, which is great. And we have an attachment parenting UAE group that I started a few years ago that is, I think there's about 600 of us in that. So it's growing, but there is still a lot of sleep training pressure over here. And there is a lot of old information being shared by doctors, pediatricians in particular. I mean, I remember when my now 6-year-old was 4 months old, going to a pediatrician, and she quoted research from the 80s telling me that my baby should be fed solids now because she wasn't gaining enough weight. And I pushed back and said, actually, no, you know, I've read the latest research and I'm following her curves and everything's fine. And she shouldn't be having solids. And she was like, no, this is the research. And it was from the 80s. And that's really worrying. And that's happening with sleep. And the number of times I hear it from people that their doctor has told them their baby should be sleeping through by now, or, oh, it's worrying that your baby is still having milk at night. I'm sorry. So a doctor is saying that?
I'm curious then, because it is such a melting pot. And I want to just quickly, sorry, the comments are starting to pop up. I get them on the side here. So first off, I just want to say hi to Jessica, who's telling me that her son is finally sleeping through and has a little brother on the way, which is very congratulations. And sleep training, as she said, it just got there, right? Like kids will get there, which is such an important message to remember. But Cynthia says in Argentina, kids usually go to bed after 9 p.m. And Elise shares that her hubby tutors a 2-year-old from 8 to 9 p.m. in Hong Kong. And
Wow.
so they're actually actively doing stuff, and it's they go to bed much later. And so there are all these cultural variations. So given these cultural variations, I'm wondering, where are these doctors coming from in Dubai? Like, where do we get, like, are they from all over, or is this really like, and so this frame of this cultural sleep training, it seems like, I don't even know, how do you get to sleep training when you're having naps, kids are up late? Like, are they, I have no words because I'm just so confused.
It is really confusing. Yeah, so the babies stay up late, and the children stay up late. If you go, before I had my first daughter, when I actually went out at night, I would go out for dinner, and I would be shocked that at 10 p.m. there would still be kids running around the restaurants. But that's just normal for local and for some other cultures as well. You're saying Hong Kong, Argentina, whereas in the UK it's not at all. But actually, there's a lot of other issues with it. For us, being from the UK, where the kids go to bed earlier, there's a lot of events that don't start until 5, 6, 7 p.m. and we miss out. There'll be a Christmas tree lighting at 7 p.m. for my kids to sleep. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that is kind of, how do we manage that? They can't manage it for every culture. The doctors are coming from all over. They are from all different nationalities. There are lots of local doctors, but there are also doctors from everywhere else as well. I've met doctors from the UK and from Ireland and from Asia and from everywhere. So it is just a melting pot. And finding a good pediatrician who is gentle and supportive of attachment parenting is so challenging. There used to be one doctor in the UAE that everyone would recommend within our circles. That was it, one. And then she left. So that became really difficult. And now I think there are 2 or 3 that people are suggesting are good. I don't have experience with them myself, but it is difficult to find.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that it has crossed such cultural barriers, like that sleep training is just, even you would think, I know there are cultures where it's still not prominent where they are. So, you know what I mean? I speak to people where, for example, in India, you don't have sleep training really advocated. There's a lot of co-sleeping. That's how things go. But yet you move to another place, and even the doctors that come from that cultural background can end up supporting something because of its, I don't know if it's because it's westernized, it's seen as good.
It's westernized, it's lifestyle. And there is a high standard of living over here. And there's a lot of, people have help in the house. A lot of people have live-in help here in Dubai. So you have a maid or a nanny who lives in your house with you. And life, the standard of living is different. The expectations are different. And I think as a result, people are looking for easy answers a lot of the time. So it's seen as, we don't have a village. There's no family. There's the children that you grew up with who became your best friends are in other parts of the world. So you don't have your old friends. You don't have that connection around you. And I think that doctors are just trying to find ways to make things easier for mums, to maintain their standard of living and to make life smooth for them. And rather than managing expectations, they're saying, okay, let's just nip this in the bud. We'll go for a behaviorist approach and we'll just shut it off.
Yeah. So that actually raised the question, because there's a comment here about how Nick wrote that a doctor told me on our first visit that he will ensure that our daughter is sleeping through the night at 4 months, as long as I don't, quote, cave to her demands for milk. So, right. But what is the breastfeeding situation in Dubai? Is there?
Yeah, actually, this is really interesting. I believe, no, I don't, I should know the laws better, but I believe that there is a law to support breastfeeding up to 2 years. Women are expected to, particularly locals, are expected to breastfeed up to 2 years and to be given the support that they need for that, which is awesome. Yeah, breastfeeding and changing rooms in all the malls, beautiful, like luxurious rooms in all the malls. You are welcome to feed. I mean, yes, a lot of people use a cover for modesty, but I don't think you would be stopped so much if you were not. I have heard of some stories of it, but if you challenge them, you know, I've heard of somebody in a doctor's waiting room being told off for breastfeeding without a cover. And I believe if you challenge them, they absolutely have no rights on that. They can't actually tell you to move or to cover or anything like that when you're breastfeeding. It is supported.
Okay. But then how do they reconcile that with the nighttime? I'm just
I know.
They feed. This is what they do. Yeah. They nurse for nutrition and growth spurts, for pain relief, for comfort, for closeness, for the whole 9 yards. I mean, it is
so important. And it's just not, it's just seen as this inconvenience. And it's, you know, it seems to be that the inconvenience has been forgotten. This, you know, it came in as this is an inconvenience, let's fix this. And that's been forgotten. And now so many parents are just saying, well, they shouldn't be feeding at night, right? And it's not, the inconvenience layer has disappeared. And now it's seen as this is how we should expect our babies to behave. And this is what we need to do or what we have to fix about our babies.
Yeah. It's crazy. It is crazy. And it's crazy to me because, you know, you often associate a link between sleep training and a lack of supportive breastfeeding, because you look at cultures where they may give lip service to breastfeeding, right? Like I'll take the United States, for example. You will always hear breast is best. Doctors talk about it, all this stuff. But even, you know, there was research a little while ago looking at doctors' perceptions of breastfeeding. So although they kept claiming, yes, we know breast milk is this, that, the other, I think it was a majority of them said that they didn't think actually most women could breastfeed fully exclusively for that long. So they have this expectation, and that goes into the advice and the support and everything they're providing to others, right? Yeah. So we have this. And so then you start getting, well, when you have that relationship where people aren't really supporting breastfeeding, of course, you're also not supporting sleep because you get to disentangle the two and view them as separate. Yeah. But when you hear of a case where you have a culture where breastfeeding is supported, and it's at least ostensibly said to be supported, and then it's kind of flipped around at night for women to reach these goals of 2 years or whatever it is that they're hoping people do, yet you're taking away those crucial nighttime feeds. It seems like such a juxtaposition that can't go together. So I'm always,
It is confusing. And the thing is, over here, it's not like we have public healthcare. I think where you are, you have healthcare, which is so fortunate. I mean, we have fantastic healthcare, but what we don't have is consistency. You know, you pay for each piece that you're going for, and you can use your insurance. That's great. But it's not like there is one person. You can choose for each thing what doctor you go to. So you have a baby, and there is not like a plan of care for you after you have the baby. There is no checkup here, and we're going to support you with a lactation consultant here, and then we're going to do this here. It is, you've got your baby. Maybe you want to go see a midwife after a few days and get some vaccines, and here's a few pieces of paper, and they just leave you to it. And you kind of have to figure out yourself what you're going to do. So that's confusing. So in terms of getting the support, unless you know to speak to a lactation consultant or book yourself in, we have a lady here called Amy who does brilliant breastfeeding courses. Unless you know to do those things, I mean, then you kind of lost and you don't have that support. So yes, it is supported in that you're not allowed to question a woman who is breastfeeding in public, but it is not supported in that you have somebody who's going to be checking on you and who is your consistent provider to go to for each stage. You can choose someone who might be able to do that for you, but then you got to be in the know. It's not great.
Just a reminder of how systemic these issues really become for sleep and everything. It almost doesn't matter the culture, whether it's one or another. There is always a systemic issue of really not supporting women and babies is what I think it really comes down to there. So, I mean, we've talked a bit about these different averages, different expectations across cultures. We have all these, you know, I mean, it sounds like even with the melting pot, all this kind of pressure to conform to what is being expected. And I know we want to talk at the beginning a bit about not just these cultural differences, but how this maps out on kind of an individual scale, because we look at these differences like, I'm in Canada, my kids are night owls, and the kids next door go to bed earlier, and we have friends that are in between and all this stuff. And I always feel for families because, you know, I will say I find it interesting and difficult to help people navigate when they're going against the grain of their culture, whatever that grain is. And, you know, I would think about the kids who are long nappers versus cat nappers. I know here you have a baby that doesn't sleep long during the day. It's, oh, that's a problem. You want to work on that. Get them up to napping 2 hours instead of accepting it. I know from cross-cultural reading that apparently in Japan, they often cap naps at an hour so that they don't want babies going longer because the belief is that it interferes with sleep. So I think about if you were there having a baby who wants to sleep 2-3 hours during the day, you'd be navigating against that cultural grain of what's going on. And so it all comes down to this idea of individual sleep needs. How do we manage the intense pressure from one side, but our children's biological needs on another for finding what their sleep needs are and helping families both identify what they are, but also handle the struggles. And this goes back to what you were saying, you know, you miss out on stuff there because your kids' individual sleep needs don't match the cultural events, everything. So, I mean, how have you managed that in your case with your kids of missing out on stuff? How did they cope with it? Are they unaware, or is it?
Generally they're unaware. I don't even mention
it. We just don't tell them. You don't know. No, the tree magically lit overnight. You know what was there.
I mean, the thing is, with a lot of the families that I work with, I talk a lot about, in fact, with every family and in all the writing I do and everything else, I talk a lot about individual needs and, temperament, how your sleep personality is actually really important. And we don't want to fight against that. We want to embrace that and work with it. But for me, a really big piece in all of this is to fight against societal pressure. And it's a huge task to try and ask people to do that. They don't want to fight against that pressure because they have it coming from so many different angles and they have enough on their minds already. And they're trying to tap into their intuition, but how are they supposed to fight through all those layers? It's a huge task, but it's a big part of what I ask people to do. Is sit with their intuition and try and tap into it and listen to that, and to really focus on their baby's cues and signals and communications right from the beginning, so that they don't feel as much of that pressure because they feel more confident in what they're doing in their own bubble. And as soon as you get people to kind of narrow down that focus, there's like a stillness, a calmness where they go, I get this. I can actually do this because I can read her and it doesn't matter what they're saying, but it takes quite a lot of effort to get to that point. And that's where I think information and awareness, I mean, this is everything that you do. This information is so important, and getting this message out to mums and dads is so vital, because without the information, there's no way that they can feel empowered enough to listen to their own intuition. Society does not encourage us to listen to our intuition at all.
No. And one of the things I often talk to families about when it's necessary is how there is this, we look at the biological urge to respond to our babies and be there and do everything. And then, we all say, but there's all these people talking, why can't I just tell them all to fuck off? Like, why is this not possible? Why does it feel so hard when I know I want to listen to my baby? And I remind families that it's like, the other factor here is that we also have a biological urge to belong.
Yeah.
And if we feel like we're doing things that take us away from the group, that from an evolutionary perspective is dangerous.
Yeah.
We don't survive on our own. We survive because we're part of a group. And so when we feel like we have to go against the grain, that is actually, it can feel threatening. So it's absolutely normal to embrace that. Yeah, it feels hard. It is absolutely, but in our world, you're not being shunned. You're not going to live in a cave by yourself. You're not going to go fight the lion by yourself. You actually do still have these other supports in place, and lots of other supports that, historically weren't there in terms of online groups and peer-to-peer support. Your family, your group, your community isn't just those people that are chirping in your ear and telling you all this stuff. It can be much broader and greater than that too.
Absolutely. And it actually, everything you're saying takes me to Brené Brown's work about belonging versus fitting in. And there is such a need to belong, and we kind of mix that up with fitting in. And so we do try and do these things that are going so against our own intuition. And, you'll read stories of people sitting outside their baby's room as the baby's crying, and they're crying equally as hard as their baby because it feels so wrong. But they think they're doing the right thing and they're fitting in with what everyone else is doing. That's not belonging. If it's hurting your heart to do something, you're not belonging in that moment. You are fitting in, which means you are squeezing yourself into something that is not you. So it's so important to find your tribe, isn't it? To find the people you do belong with.
Yes. And we want to be careful with that word. I've really been reading about the cultural appropriation of that word from indigenous cultures. So I am really trying to avoid it. And I've been reading a lot. So I bring that up I know it's not tangential to this, but it is something that, it's a topic for a whole other day, but no, but our group, it's to find your group. And I love what you said about the fitting in there. And one of the other ways I like to think about it is not just, is it hurting you, but are these people that you're doing this, please, are they going to run and rescue you? Are they the ones that are coming in that are going to take care of you when you're sick? Are they going to feed you? Are they going to make sure you and your family are okay? Because if they're not, you're not belonging with them. You are just fitting in. And to the people who are there and that love you, like your family, as much as they may chirp, will they still be there if you're not fitting in with what they want you to do?
Yeah.
Because if they will, then you still belong. And so it's okay to say, hey, I'm doing something a little different here and not what you.
It's such a good way of putting it. Exactly. If they're not going to stick around, then that's
why you care.
Yeah.
Like, those are not the people you want anyway. Like, you can agree with you all you want, but if you're not there, like, they don't, that's what it is. So, here's our question. So we have the issue of, as you put it, I love it, reaching the stillness point of being able to focus on your baby. But what comes with this cultural pressure, and I think is one of the larger issues, is the lack of support. How do we help families with, they have this intense pressure, and then people not only don't support them, but often turn around with, oh, well, you made the rod for your own back. So you.
It drives me mad.
How do you get families to either come to terms with that they're not going to be supported, to face some of the struggles and barriers that are in place for them? And I realize this is a huge question, so feel free to, take chunks because it's such a massive one, but you've been there yourself, right? Having been told that, doctors don't say, well, if you're struggling, I want you to sleep train. You say, no, I don't want to do that. They say, okay, well, let's think about how else can we support you, meet your needs. They're like, well, that's what you've got to do. And they kind of walk away from you at that point.
We have a really fortunate thing over here. And I know that it exists in other countries, but in the UAE, Facebook groups are actually a really big support, because I think particularly in Dubai is small, and people kind of know each other, and the groups are strong, and you can ask for advice, and it's like having a neighborhood, except your neighborhood is enormous on a neighborhood perspective. But so those groups are really helpful. And for me, I was in that situation, but the first thing I did was go on to a group over here for breastfeeding support, and I plugged in the weight of my baby at different ages, and I sent it out, and I said, I've been asked to start feeding solids, doesn't feel right to me, doesn't match with my research, what do you think? And I had like 30 responses straight away. I had lactation consultants messaging on there, going through, plotting the figures themselves and saying, look, you are fine, do this, do that, speak to a lactation consultant. You know, they were so supportive that I felt informed and empowered and confident to ignore the advice of that doctor. So having that network, it's not my group in person, and some of these people I've never met, many of them I've never met, but it was a support that really changed things for me. And that was another point that started getting me going, okay, I can do my own research here, and I am empowered to do my own research, become informed, and make my own choices for my family. So talking with clients, it's the same thing. Becoming informed is really, really important. And you don't have to trust my opinion. You can don't trust anyone's opinion, including mine. But do your own research and listen to what feels right to you. Yeah. And, so long as people know that, if somebody comes to them and say, just trust what I'm saying, that's an alarm bell as well. Because no, they should be allowed to do all the research and then find what feels right for them.
Yes, absolutely.
I've got no ego over it. If they don't want to trust what I'm saying, that's okay, because every family is different.
Yeah. Oh, I take calls. It's fun. I actually enjoy. Sometimes families will come and be like, we need to talk through, like, one of us has heard all these, and we'll do like a debunking or discussion of research that they've been told and everything else. It's, you know what I mean? You kind of go through, no, but my doctor said this study said this and this said that and everything. And it's like, okay, let's go. And it's some of my most favorite calls, because I'm like, I love those discussions, because it is nuanced and it is important. And actually, it's interesting. A question popped up. How do you weed out the research that seems science-based but conflicts with what you feel is right? So I'll ask you, how do you do that? Because I know what I do, but.
Yeah, I mean, for me, obviously, reading through the research is a really big thing. There's a really famous study that you'll be very familiar with, Tracy, that is talking about how sleep training is great because the parents get more rest, they reported more sleep, it's all really positive. And very, very, there's one line in that research that says, oh, but the ACT graph did show that the baby still woke up the same number of times. The sleep training didn't actually change the number of wake ups. Yeah. But the conclusion was still that sleep training is great.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's absolutely shocking that this is how things are being put out there to the public, and it's not accurate. It's not. We have to do the digging through it ourselves. But for me, it's for people who are looking for support. I would say it's more about finding people that you resonate with, listening to their message, and if you still resonate with that, then great, follow that path. If you are only going purely science, listening to the research from lots of different people, you then have to go down the route of digging yourself and reading that research for yourself, because it's there's too much nuance in it, as you said. But if you can find people that you resonate with and you start to hear things that feel right to you, for me, that's where you need to sit. That's kind of the path to follow. What was, you said, you know, what you would say?
I do with research. It's slightly different. I mean, for anyone that's listening that doesn't know me, my PhD is in developmental psychology, and I did a minor in psychometrics or research methods. And so I absolutely adore delving deep into studies, and I take a look at the methodologies, everything. And, you know, what comes up for me is, well, I did an entire module that's run through Breastfeeding Conferences Australia on the science around sleep training. So you talk about you've got to now delve into every study. Yeah. I did that. And it's fascinating. You know, it's still available through BARB if people are interested. If you're a lactation consultant, it's continuing education credits. But it's a 80-minute video document with things. It is, I mean, I'll be honest here. The science is, I don't look at how I feel. The science part of me still goes, I've got to read a research article as unbiased as possible. There's always bias. Obviously there is. But I also came to my view on sleep training, which I used to think was a personal choice prior to kids. I still didn't like it. I wouldn't have done it. My mom didn't do it. This was not like our norm. But I didn't see a problem with it. So I actually came to the conclusion against it through reading the science.
Right.
So when I saw it was like, this doesn't make sense. And I'm reading the conclusions and then reading the article, and you're like, this isn't really mapping what you're saying here. So I always find, like, I still have to read the articles, even if it doesn't feel right to me. I have to read through and see what it is. And I have yet to come across an article where I didn't go, okay, well, fine. We're looking at X, we're looking at Y. I was just sent a new one that recently out of Alberta said that, you know, cry out is okay. There was no problems long-term. The problem is the lack of definitions and clarity in what they were assessing is so incredibly vague that there's really very little you can take. It's not even clear how long did people cry out? What was the temperament of the children? Like, this was all left to debate here. And then a lot of times what gets promoted is not in line with what the research is. So you mentioned Gradisar's paper, and they found, interestingly, that although parents were happy, the actigraph showed that infants did not sleep any better. And that's actually not the only study. There are others that have used actigraph, for those out listening, who there is no difference in sleep after sleep training. So it becomes, who is this for? And it's for parents, absolutely. And then that raises a whole other question. But, you know, we look at these and people still push the other. The other thing that was fascinating about Gradisar's paper was that they had 3 groups. So they had the sleep training group, the control group, but they also had what's called fated bedtime, where you just push bedtime back bit by bit until you reach the point where babies go to bed faster. And how do they sleep? So basically building up sleep pressure. And that group was just as effective for parents, and in some of the measures, even more effective to parent well-being than the controlled crying group. But the conclusions still came down about, oh, controlled crying is great. And I'm going, but you also just offered an alternative. I mean, their sleep didn't change much either, to be perfectly honest. Neither did that group. So, I mean, all groups ended up with the same sleep at the end, but at least a baby staying up a bit longer and still being responded to all the time. Cool. I mean, I personally don't have any objections to that, because and it was based on how long you go with fated bedtime is, you know, if your baby takes longer than like 30 minutes to fall asleep, we'll push bedtime back 15 minutes the next day. And then if they take still until you get to, well, if the baby's taking over 30 minutes to fall asleep, they're not ready for sleep.
They're tired.
Or they get there, but I find that's possibly, I don't know, I have my own, I always say overtired is a thing that gets brought up a bit too frequently amongst you. But these are, you know, generally, if you're talking about a happy baby who's awake but not falling asleep, they're not overtired. They're just out doing their thing. So, okay, and then they still sleep the same. So why are we not talking about that? Because that seemed to help the parent issue. So we have alternatives for parents. We just ignore them. Or co-sleeping. Can we talk about co-sleeping? Because why is this not a viable alternative for people?
I know. It drives me absolutely mad. It's
Sorry,
like,
we just cut out for a minute there.
Mad. Can you hear me now?
I think we're back.
Okay, good.
I can. Yes, there we go.
Yeah, it's absolutely phenomenal, the amount of misinformation that is out there, and twisting of information that is out there. It's like the term self-soothing that is so misappropriated that it's caused so much impact on baby sleep and on parental expectations and on parents feeling like failures because their baby isn't drowsy but awake when they lay them down and all of this stuff. And it all comes from some poor guy who used the term in a study and not in that way at all.
Yeah. Thomas Anders. Yeah. He didn't even mean to use it that way. He just was using it as a counter to those kids that fell asleep, and self-settling was even acknowledged later a better term to have used. No, and that's my research for my PhD looked at emotion development stuff. So I looked at, so the development of emotion regulation requires co-regulation. Babies don't self-soothe any more than I could run a super marathon. That's not happening anytime soon. Heck, I can run a marathon. I probably can't even run a 5K, but that's a totally separate issue.
I was upset in the middle of the night. If I woke up crying from a nightmare, then I would probably struggle to get back to sleep on my own. And I have a fully developed prefrontal cortex. What about these tiny little babies?
I know. It's, well, and one of the loops that people, I think, don't realize, or I'm going to say don't realize, don't know, but the way our prefrontal cortex develops, and this is why we talk about, people worry about the stress of sleep training and everything for young babies, and that's a whole big issue. But our prefrontal cortex, the teacher for our prefrontal cortex is actually the amygdala. So we're born, we have an amygdala, it reacts strongly to events. And how it reacts, the frequency, the fear, what it reacts to actually helps shape how our prefrontal cortex is then going to respond to threat. And then, as it put in this great paper that I used the teacher from a paper that talked about this, then the prefrontal cortex becomes the teacher and the amygdala becomes the student again. Wow. But it's become a teacher through that pathway. So these early experiences shape how the prefrontal cortex responds to future events. So when we do this, it's not only not having a prefrontal cortex that's fully mature, but we're actually shaping it to how it's going to look later. And I'm just like, how do we ignore all this when we get there? It just seems like, we in favor of what's best for parents or what's best. And even then, you brought up the issue of parents sitting and crying outside their child's door. Is that best for a parent?
I have a lot of clients who have said that they regret having done it in the first place. And as you said, with, they've been to multiple people and then they're like, okay, I have to go to someone who actually feels right for me. There are a lot of people who regret it. They've done it because they thought that was the right thing to do and it didn't feel right and they feel uncomfortable during it and then afterwards. And then it all goes pear-shaped again when there's teething or sickness or travel. And then they say, I wish I hadn't done it. And I wish other people knew that it isn't necessary, but there isn't enough information out there for them. Or the information is out there, but the access to that information is not as easy as it should be. It's not as prevalent as it should be. But that's what we're here for.
But it's interesting. This reminds me of something I talked to Carly Grubb about a couple of weeks ago when we talked, and she shared her story. And she acknowledged, so many people don't share their stories because it's so intensely painful. Yeah. When we think we've done, I know I've done things that, even I think about my son he had a tongue tie at birth. And when I had to get that released, and it was, comical. He couldn't even reach his jaw without it being a full heart. The latch was just excruciating. My doula laughed when she saw him. She's like, well, that's like our picture perfect tongue tie of like, we could just take a picture of it and put it up and be like, this is what it looks like. Sorry, I think we cut out again for a moment. Oh my goodness. Hear you. Internet connection in winter. I apologize. So they took, you know, it had to be done. But I remember the feeling of hearing him cry and the fact that I felt like I had hurt him. I had made a choice that negatively affected him. Now, I will say he just turned 5 and is still nursing. So I feel like this was probably the right move and loves it. So, I mean, there you go. But it's something that was really hard to talk about and come to terms with, even though at that time I still knew this was, and eventually it would have had to have been done probably anyway for speech and everything else, given the degrees. So you go to, but even though I knew all that, it was intensely painful. And I still don't even like talking about it. I want to just forget that day because I sat, he had to go separate, and I sat outside crying, exactly like the mom, like bawling my eyes out of what have I done? And so when I think about this with families like this, it's so intensely painful. But I think the more we have people like Carly and other moms who can actually face it and speak up about it, that just like that peer-to-peer support that helped you at the beginning, those groups that help you identify, that peer-to-peer awareness for sleep and these experiences can also be incredibly helpful. I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I do believe it.
Totally agree. Totally agree. It's absolutely necessary to be talking about these things and processing them. The thing is, I think it's much easier to talk about it if you have then found your way out of it. If you've kind of stopped at that point, so if you've done sleep training, for example, and you had an awful experience, but you haven't gone anywhere else with that, then I think it can be very difficult to process and talk about that. But, you know, for me and for Carly and for so many other people, once you've had a negative experience, something that's been uncomfortable or hurt you in the way that you're having to deal with your child because of societal expectations and all these other things, if you find a way out, which is what we did with, you know, going through gentle sleep instead and truly supporting a baby's healthy sleep, people become almost evangelical about it. You know, you want to talk about it. You want to tell other people that there is another route. And that's when you start telling your story. But I think if you haven't got to that point, you kind of hold it quite deep and it can be quite hurtful.
I agree. I think you're probably spot on that. So I know we're coming up on time here. So I have one last question. I have one last question that I want to ask, though. I feel like we talked about this generalist view of sleep, the cultural expectations, the individual view. How do we get away from these generalist view of sleep, this idea that all babies must be doing something? I was listening to Helen Ball's public lecture before, and she talked about the statistical knowledge. And we use statistical knowledge against parents, even though statistical knowledge is culturally based. So we look at, you know, what dictates the average amount a baby sleeps, what culture they live in, what the parent practices are, even how you measure it, right? Like we talked about that study. Parents will swear their kids are sleeping through the night, and we look at data and go, not at all, sorry. But if they're not waking you, okay, you don't know that. So how do we get doctors, families, everyone, I'm just going to dump it all on you. You let me know how. How do we get families here to move towards a more individualist, getting them to look at your baby? What is your baby need? Don't look at the clock. Don't look at what Joe down the street does. Look at your baby. How do we make that shift for people?
Oh, it's so difficult. It's such a huge job. I wish I knew the answer, honestly. The things that I do and that I think help, although on such a small basis, I wish it was so much bigger. You know, like I provide for, on my website, anyone can download a sleepy signals decoder. This is just a really small example, but you download it for free and you can see lots of different sleepy signals, ways that your babies are telling you that they are tired. There are so many different ways on there, and there are so many different groups that they fall into and ways that people can interpret it, that it kind of makes parents realize, okay, that they're not all the same. I've got to look at my baby and identify what is right with my baby. And I think a lot of what we do needs to be more in those terms of talking about it not in a generalist term, talking about it in a wide range. Like when I share with parents a sleep table of how many hours a baby should sleep at different ages, those tables have caused so much harm for parents. But my table that I use, at one age, for example, it's between 10 and 18 hours is a healthy range, rather than 16 to 18 hours. It's between 10 and 18. And this instantly dissolves the stress on parents, because they go, oh, okay, so my baby that's only sleeping 12 hours is not abnormal. And it's, opening up these ranges, making everything wider, rather than here is the average of 16 hours. Why is your baby only doing 12? It's widening everything out and making parents feel a little bit more like, okay, I'm in that wide range. I think helps.
Absolutely. I think of it as I explain the bell curve to people, right? Like this is, we don't say, oh, your baby is okay. So the average of babies' weights at this age is whatever, 12 to 14 kilos. Your baby's 10 kilos, and that's the 30th percentile. No, that's not right. We've got to start, every child must. We don't do that. Like, we acknowledge that this is an average, and it goes like this all around, and you can fall anywhere out. And maybe there are ends that are problematic, maybe. And that's a maybe. And usually, though, it's also not an infant sleep problem. It's something else, but it is. That's not, but all these ranges remain normal within that. So we're not looking at something that is necessarily a problem. And if you wouldn't worry about your child's weight if they were in the 30th or 20th, or because let's be honest, no one worries if their baby sleeps too much. I don't know. I don't have anyone that comes to you with, my baby sleeps too much. I don't know what to do. Like, baby wants to sleep 16 hours a day, and that's there you go. That's never been the concern. So it's like everything from this midpoint up, we accept. Even though actually you can get to too much sleepiness as an indication of some underlying problem that we just, again, we've pathologized less sleep and normalized, even when it is pathological, more sleep, which is fascinating. But yeah, it's like somehow if you won't do it with your baby's weight or their height, oh, you're not tall enough. What are we going to do? Let's stretch you out. That's not something that we would do for this. So I don't know what, but yet sleep is, and I think it's partly, we seem to live in a culture where we've decided sleep is the panacea to all, like for everything, right? Like, oh, kids would be smarter, happier, better, this, that, the other, if they just slept more, as opposed to realizing that sleep is the accumulation of all these other events. And yes, it affects so much more, but it's not, you can't just change this one piece, because all these other things are still in place and they all affect everything as well.
Absolutely. And you'll find a lot of people will actually hang their other issues on sleep. They will, it might be a marital issue. It might be an adjustment to parenthood issue, or, so many other things that could be happening, stress with work or postpartum depression, but it gets hung on sleep. If I fix the sleep, everything else will feel okay. And it's not. And when you start digging, when I take clients on and I start digging with them, I go, actually, I don't think that is the issue here. They're in that 10 to 18 hour range.
They're fine. You might not be. And that's, another really important thing is, I just did that meme on Instagram, just reminding people that a baby's sleep can be entirely normal. What's not normal is coping with it alone in the way we've structured our society. When you are alone without support, two parents expected to do it all, that's not normal. And that's, I think, where our culture doesn't want to make that shift, right? Is we don't want to work towards supporting families, so we put the burden of change on babies.
Yeah. And especially in the last year with everybody in lockdown, and there's been even less support and more fear and more anxiety about going out, and going to a doctor's is quite a big decision when you're in the middle of a pandemic. You know, quite stressful to expose your newborn baby to a hospital situation. So I can't even imagine having a newborn baby right now.
Oh God. Oh, and you know what? Any baby where you're home, like even first year, where I think newborns, in some sense, there's that stress, but as they get older, all the panic about, well, I can't get out, I can't take them to the park, they need to move, they need to see people, all that stress manifests too. And not getting out affects sleep. Amazing.
We have over here in Dubai a lot of apartment living as well. So when lockdown happened, you know, the babies, they were going to the park every day, they're going for walks every day, and then suddenly they don't have a garden out the back that they can go to. So instead, they're inside their apartment, and their outdoor space is a balcony during lockdown. That's tough.
That is very hard. That is so much. So, all right. I know we're at time here, and I want to thank you so much. And I did mention it earlier, but I would just like to point out, you're a rock star. You did this while fighting COVID. Like that is,
I'm on the other side of it. I'm feeling a bit better today.
Good.
Even
so, I mean, I was just like, I don't know. I think I'd be flat on my back, but that's just me. But
I was yesterday.
So it's good we just had it today. We did
Thank you so much for inviting me on. It was so lovely to chat.
Oh, it is so nice to chat. So can you just finish off for me? Tell me, where does everyone find you on? Because I mean, I mentioned you have Facebook, you've got Instagram, but what's the handle, everything like that?
Yeah, so it's at The Gentle Mama. I'm on Instagram at The Gentle Mama, and it's the one with 1 M. There is The Gentle Mama with 2 M's who came after me. The Gentle Mama with 1 M. And on Facebook as well. And I have a website. And I should say I'm not actually taking any clients right now. I'm working on something, so I don't have any. I've had to shut down my waiting list. But I will be taking clients again very soon. So yeah.
Okay. Message me. Like that download you talked about online and everything, and that's thegentlemama.com.
Yes, so if they go to thegentlemama.com, they can fill in their email address. They'll get the Sleepy Signals decoder, and then I send out other useful stuff in my emails. And I am available for DMing. I haven't whilst I've been fighting coronavirus, but I will be back on that very soon. So yeah, you can still get in contact with me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being with me and talking about all these issues. And please feel better soon. Get better. Come back, and I'm excited to hear whatever this big project is that you're working on. So you'll have to keep me posted. And thank you, everyone, for watching live, after listening, if that's how you're going here. And as always, you can find me at evolutionaryparenting.com. And thank you once again.